Okay, congratulations on finishing the creative chapters. And in this final chapter, we're going to export these trees out of a speed tree into some common modeling and rendering softwares out there. And of course, there are some considerations that you need to have when exporting these trees. And the first thing is that if you remember, we created these in feet, and now this one is 80 feet tall. And if I export this one as it is into Blender, since my default Blender is using centimeters, instead it's going to export it as centimeters into a speed tree, which results in an incorrect modeling import. So let's see what I mean. To export a tree out of a speed tree, the shortcut key that you can press is the Control E shortcut, or you can go to this file, new, and export mesh. Okay, the shortcut you see here is Control plus E. So hit that, and you will be welcomed with this screen in here, which allows you to control the name of the export and of course the format that you're going to export. Most of the times you're going to use FBX and OBJ, so we're fine with FBX now, and for the naming is going to inherit the name of the project. So let's hit save, and after locating the file export location, we have some settings in here. I'm not right now doing anything because I want to show how the unit setup is important upon the export. So I'm going to hit OK just to see what problems it makes. So hit OK and wait so that the exporting gets done. Okay, the exporting is done and now we're ready to go into Blender. And here we are in Blender, and most of the times I use the metric and centimeters units for my work. So let's go in here in this menu, the scene properties, and for units you see it's in metric. So let's now import that tree. And this is the same directory that I exported. Now I'm going to import this file into a speed tree with all of the settings default. So it imports, wait just a bit so that it imports the tree. And it imported, and now you see the scale of the tree is very wrong because we're using a metric system, and now it has imported that as 80 centimeters instead of 80 feet. And if I bring a default cube, this default cube is 2 by 2. And if you look at this, you see that it's roughly 80 centimeters tall. And of course, the transformation that it has found is as well wrong because we want the tree to be standing, not something like that. So we want the tree to be spawned like this. But as for the material, it's right. And here we are in material mode, and the material is showing all right. So let's delete this tree. And now I'm going to fix these problems. And instead of exporting as 80 units, which will be imported in Blender and Unreal, for my case, because I use Blender and Unreal very much, we're going to set the units to be right. So let's go to Tools and go to Scene Unit Conversion. And now we're going to change the unit to centimeters. So we are using centimeters or meters, depending on your target softwares and workflow. And we're going to convert this from feet because this is now in feet, the default is feet tree. So we're going from feet to centimeters. So let's go. And now you see the indicator says that we have something like 2,500 units, which equals to 80 feet completely. But if you're not seeing the speed tree mannequin down there, you need to do something. If you remember, there was a mannequin which indicated the size of the human being. So to bring that and see the scale, you want to go to Edit, Preference, and in here in Height Indicator, you want to go from feet to centimeters as well. And now the size of the human is relatively true to the size of the tree. The first problem got solved. And we need to now export this to see the result. But one thing to consider is that SpeedTree, I believe, is one of the programs that uses the Z up. If you look at this gizmo in here, you see the Z is up. And the same goes for Blender. Let me go to Blender and bring in something, for example, this cube. And if I look at it, you see the blue axis, which indicates the Z goes up. and the Z is up as well. For example, this is the case for some softwares, and you need to have this in mind as well when you're going to export from a speed tree. If your destination program is a Z up, you want to consider that as well. So let's go. Again, hit Control and E, and we're going to replace that with the same tree that we had. So hit save, and now you need to do something to fix that. By default, when you want to transform something from a speed tree, it has the swap Y and Z enabled, which makes the transforms a bit not what we wanted really. So I'm going to delete this one because Blender as well is a Z up, and we really do not want to swap swap Y and Z or flip anything. We're going to export it as it is. So I'm going to hit OK, and we got our export rightly done. And now I'm in Blender and I want to re-import that as well. This is it, and I'm going to import FVX, and boom, the tree export size is really alright, and the transformation are good as well. So to test that, let me bring in a default cube, and this cube is 2 meters, and the tree is 24 meters, which equals to 80 feet. Okay, we got this problem done, and the material as well working alright if we go to material view. Okay, and to test that if the scales work or not, I brought in this default 2x2 cube and used array modifier to arrange them in the Z. And since this is 2x2, we should have 12 instances to make it 24 meters. And you see the scale is right, and we're good to continue exporting things the way we want it. And let's go explore other exporting options as well. So again, I'm hitting Control and E to bring up the export dialog and overwrite this file. And the first option that we see is group by. And by default, it's using hierarchy and 0 all, and it means it's going to use this hierarchy that you have created. This is the first level, second level, third, fourth, and go beyond. And it's going to group them based on the hierarchy. And if you set it to 0, it's going to group them all into the same category. Just like what we're seeing in Blender. If I select this tree, it's only a single mesh. I'm able to move that around, and it's a single group. And if you start to go to more hierarchies, for example, let's go to 3 or 4 and export to see what happens. So it exported. Let's delete this one and re-import the other mesh in here. And it imported, and although this is the mesh that it has been grouped together, but you can take individual values and change them. So let's take the trunk, and now you see the trunk has been selected. And if I try to move it, you see it tries to move the whole thing because everything is the children of this in a speed tree. And if I take this big branch, for example, if I take this and try to move it, it's going to move it and its children's because of the hierarchy system that we created there. And if I take a single leaf in here, I'm able to move this without any problem. And if I take this, you see the pivot is set to every mesh separately. And if I take the tree, take the trunk, which is the first level in the speed tree hierarchy, which is this one, it's going to make them all bigger. And if I take this big branch, it's going to affect itself and its children's. And if I take a single leaf, it's going to make it bigger. And if I take this single cluster, it's going to make it. And if I take this single leaf in here, it's going to make that bigger as well. So it creates a hierarchy system for you. And if you expand this, you're able to see the different components of that. And now you see we have the trunk, we have the tip of the trunk, which is there. And then after that, we're getting the big branches. And then going down, you can have more controls over that. So this is the hierarchy and how it's important to create a export. So let's take this No, let's take the trunk and delete it. And it has done something funny, you see, because now the trunk isn't holding any of them. They're going to random directions. And if you look at here, we are having the amount of polygon. So if I take this one and focus it, we are getting this. Although we have removed the tree, the trunk of the tree, these have been remained in the place. So I'm taking everything and delete them. And since these are containers, whenever I try to remove them, the childrens get out. And these are the childrens of them. So I'm going to start a new scene. So the next option when trying to export them is grouping by material. And as you know, it's going to look at these materials and look at these as well and group everything that uses as the same material, the same object. So hit export again and again import that in here. And now you see that the trunk and the branch and anything that is using the bark material has been exported as the same object, and the leaves and anything that is using the leaf material has been exported separately. And the next option is grouping by the geometry type. And now it's going to look at these generators. And in here now we have only two types of generators, which one is the branch generator, and of course the branch generator is being used for trunk as well. In geometry type, trunk is also considered as a branch, and we're getting a similar result just like the previous one. So let me go back, and on top of one of these, for example on top of the trunk, let me add a front. Okay, now we have three types of geometries. So again, export, and now we're going to separate them and group them based on the geometry type. Okay, and again, let's import that into Blender, and successfully imported. And now you see the front has been grouped single, separately. The leaves are being grouped separately, and the trunk and the branches, because all of these get calculated as the branch, they have been exported separately as well. So this is about grouping, and let's go on other. And you should have this in mind that we're exporting these for VFX applications and not to be used in a game application. And later on, we are going to talk about the game export as well. So the next option is the transform. And this one is really subjective, depending on the software that you are authoring these trees for. You want to choose one of these options. So it takes a couple of experimentations with your target software. And if you see if one of the axes is wrong, you simply flip it or swap it and get the result right. Just like the Blender situation when we uncheck the swap Y and Z. So for the next exporting option, because it's wind and it's going to be heavy on this and it's going to create a large file size and take too long to export, I decided to create a default scene in here with a very simple tree. So I'm going to delete these twigs and this to make it more simple as well. So let's go here, wind wizard. I'm going to create this tree, and now we're taking the wind animation going on, and if I decide to increase it, I'm able to. And to create a good export for exporting the trees into Blender, for example, and have the wind animation on, you want to check the wind option on in the export. And I recommend you, instead of exporting FBX, go with Alembic. So hit Ctrl and E, and now instead of using FBX, I'm going to go for Alembic, which is this one, ABC format. And Blender reads it very well. So I'm going to name this one wind. And if it's not by default turned on, just turn the wind on. And since we have not any growth animation, we're not doing that. And let's again disable this. And the next option is going to be loop, and it's going to make the animation seamless. And if it goes from frame 1 to frame 50, for example, it's going to make it seamless so that they read well together. So I'm going to activate the loop, And for wind strength, it's going to either be current, which is the current wind strength that you have here, or you want to set a custom value for it. So I'm going to set 1, for example, and now here you want to decide how many frames you want your animation to have. So now I'm going to 200, which makes it more than a second and a half, and that equals to total of 300 frames of animation. So this is the animation, and now we're going to hit OK to see the results. So again, here we are in Blender, and let's go to import, and the format is here, ABC. And this is the direction when we save the file, hit OK, and looks like the transformation is not so right. Doesn't matter, we just need to check the wind animation. So hit play, and now you see the wind animation playing perfectly and without any problem. And just let me make the transformations right and hit the animation, and now you see the loop is going on without any problem, and it's so seamless. And we're getting the amount of wind, which was 1, which actually was a quite high amount of wind, and successfully it created a wind animation for us as well. So the next option, again, I'm going to export this as FBX. The next options are include, and this is really for advanced usages. Normally you want to have the geometry in, and the geometry includes the geometry that these generators create. No matter if it's a branch generator or a leaf generator, both of them calculate as the geometry. And for example, if you want to have the bones and a skeleton exported, or if you want to have the branch spines, if any, exported, or if you have any vertex blending in here to be exported as well. And as I said, these are very special case usages that normally to beginner users do not want to really change. So the next option is the texture, and it's going to first be the format of your texture. And if you have, for example, imported 8K texture, you can here, or 4K or 2K, doesn't matter. And here you can check for the maximum size. For example, if you don't want to all of your texture to go beyond 1K, you can set that. Or you can hit original, so that every texture with the same resolution that you imported is going to export out of a speed tree. So the next one is an important one, and it's unwrap UVs. And we have talked already about the UVs, and of course the second UVs for light map. But this one controls the UV generation for the first light map. And if you hit OK, you're going to get a new window asking some questions. So hit OK. Now this is going to ask you a question. And if you want to export the texture as an atlas or as UDIM. And this UDIM is somehow a new workflow, and instead of using only 0 to 1 UV space, it's going to go beyond that. For example, here we are in Blender, and this is the basic UV of the default sphere, the default cube. And you see everything has been packed into 0 to 1 UV space. And this is a traditional method. But the UDIM is going to add some of these again so that you can pack more info into them, getting a higher resolution. And if you want to check the UDIM, you want to see if the target software supports UDIM or not. So to better know the UDIMs, you want to go hit N in here to bring up this menu and go into view, and in this UDIM grid, it's now into 1-on-1. And if you hit 2x1 or 2x2, it's going to add more 0 to 1 UV spaces so that you can have more information in them. And it's going to expand this 0 to 1 UV space depending on your needs. Again, I'm insisting that the target software should support the UDIM workflow. And the atlas is going to export them all on the same texture, just like the atlas that we created for the grass example. So the next one, obvious, the resolution. You want to set the resolution in here. And the next option is going to check the relative size between the UV islands that it's going to create. And it's going to take a bit of experimentation to work with. And the next one is a really deciding factor, and it's going to change the control type. The first one that you have is by geometry type. For example, in here you see the branches, caps, fronds, leaves, and things like that. And the second one is by material. And now since we have only two materials in this, we either give the importance to bark or leaves. And the next one is by using the generators. And now all of the generators that we have created are here. For example, level 1B, level 2B, level any generator. And this is where the naming of the generators gets important as well. And the next option beside every of them is the scale. And they have a controlled an action called stacked or unwrapped. And stacking and unwrapping is a technique used in 3D applications. And let us go for an example. So this is the tree that we exported. Of course, I have removed a lot of the leaves so that we get a bit faster on this. And let's go to material mode. And these are the leaves that we have. So I'm selecting all of these leaves and open the UV editor in here. And if I go to geometry mode to be able to manipulate these in the UV section, I get this texture from Megascan's library, and if select them all, you see I'm seeing only one island. But this is not the reality. All of these have been stacked on top of each other. And if I select a group, for example, if I take an island and bring it over, you see there are more islands in here. And exactly this is not only one UV island. It's multiple of, for example, thousands of UV islands being stacked on top of each other. And when controlling the stack, it's going to create something like that. It's going to stack, for example, all of the leaves into one island. But if you hit unwrap, it's going to unwrap them each one by one so that they do not share the same UV space. And you're going to get something like this. For example, if I select them all, and since they are already unwrapped, I'm going to pack them. We might get something like this. All of the individual leaves have been unwrapped, and we're getting something like the light map. And when we export the texture, the atlas of every one of these is going to include this leaf copied into them. So depending on your workflow, you either want to stack them on top of each other or using a complete unwrap so that it unwraps every section. For example, if you have thousands of leaves, it's going to unwrap every one of them separately and they do not share the same UV space. And as I said, it's based on the target software that you're going to export for. So as the example of UVing and stacking, I created this small scene and I'm using the grass material for the leaves and some little small branches. And I exported twice, one using the stacked options with these settings, and one of course set all of them to unwrapped. And you can of course set one of them to unwrapped and one other to the others to stacked as well. And one example would be when you import some photogrammetry meshes into a speed tree. You do not want them to really share the same UV space because all of them have the unique details and you do not want to overlap them on top of each other because all of your details are going to get lost. So in that case, you want to go to generators, for example, and we know that the branch generator is using photogrammetry. So we hit unwrapped instead of using a stacked. So that if generator is using photogrammetry, we unwrap it. And we really do not want to stack it on top of other meshes. So this is the base color of my stacked. And all of the branches are being stacked on top of each other. And the leaves as well, since I used the grass material, they have been stacked on top of each other as well. And this is what we are getting. They have been stacked on top of each other. For every one of these, they have the share UV space. And this is the albedo result of my unwrapped. And for every one of the leaves and branches, I'm having the same unique unwrap. And you see this grass pattern being repeated. That's the result of pattern unwrapped. So the main guideline is if you have unique details, you want it to be unwrapped. But if it's generated by a speed tree and doesn't have any unique details, for example, all of these these leaves are the same, you want to put all of them to be as a stacked. Okay, this lesson is getting to its end, and in the next lesson we're going to be talking about the game export and some other softwares as well. Okay, see you there.